The sounds of war forced their way into earshot. James shot out of the tunnel and into the rugged, unforgiving trench. Bullets and grenades and even some cannon fire formed a fiery ceiling just above his dainty whistle. James saw the clearing ahead, the flat land where the trench would offer no protection, and where he'd come face to face with this war for the first time. I know I've got to go on. I know that. But... He was much further this time. A few more feet, and he'd be out in the open. His funnel was already peeking over the wall. Everything in me is telling me no. This will destroy me. The war's over, James. It's been for decades. James was really relieved to have Edith's company again, but the fear still raced through his boiler tubes. This is a painful memory, a phantom. None of this can hurt you now. But James just gulped. It didn't hurt me then. Edith squinted, surprised. I beg your pardon. This branch line has decided to show you a battlefield. It's forcing you to relive your worst moment. You're right. It is my worst moment. But not in the way you think. James had never sounded more ashamed in his life. He couldn't be lower. James, how did you spend the First World War? The war that ruined this branch line. The war that cost so many boys in this region their lives. What was it like for you? I can't. You must be honest, James. The branch line demands honesty, a true reflection. I won't! You must! Please! Speak the truth! I didn't serve! I burst a cylinder in the first week of the war, and I didn't leave the works until it was over, while everyone else worked themselves to the frames with troop trains and munitions loads and all the other vital goods. I cowered in the very back corner of Hallway, in the darkness, and I waited for it all to stop. I wanted to help. I wanted to lessen the burden. But the heavy trains, the low maintenance, the work, I just couldn't do it. I didn't want to wear out like the others. I didn't want to fall in the line of duty. I didn't want to be disposable. At that moment, the fierce winds swirling around them stopped. The roaring tides calmed again, and the gunfire ceased in totality. And James was left in silence, with nothing but his thoughts, his shame, and his bitter tears. Move forward, James, into the open, into the light. James managed a deep, shaky breath, and then rolled slowly forward, out of the trench. At last, he could see the battlefield. He could see the brutality, the loss of life. It must have been thousands of young men, all slain in the service of their country. James saw himself in every one of them. They suffered the fate that he hadn't dared to, perhaps in a different way, in a different place, but they were all victims of the same war, victims of their duty. They're all Sudrians, aren't they? Not just Sudrians. They were all Arlesborough boys. They called this part of the island their home, but they never made it back here. They died in another country, far from their families, far from everything they knew and loved. Heavens! I think it's time they came home. Don't you, James? If only. But it wasn't a fantasy, for as James looked around, he realized to his shock that the soldiers were slowly rising from the ground, As more and more came to their feet, they began to walk toward the coach. James could see their young faces as they passed him by. You were young too, James. Nobody can blame you for being terrified, especially on a railway that saw you as replaceable. You don't blame me? No, James, I don't. And neither does the branch. Then why put me through this? Why did it choose to show me this vision, of all visions? This branch lost itself to war, James. A war you've repressed for over 30 years. You couldn't respect its trauma until you faced your own. I understand now. I get it. And he did. James looked back to watch the soldiers taking their seats. Amazingly, despite hundreds and hundreds of them having lined up, only a few dozen were still to board. Once the last boy entered, he waved appreciatively to James and shut the door tight. All right then, to Arlesborough.